doubt or denial themselves presuppose and indirectly affirm it. When I pronounce anything to be true, I pronounce it, indeed, to be relative to thought, but not to be relative to my thought, or to the thought of any other individual mind. From the existence of all individual minds as such I can abstract, I can think them away. But that which I cannot think away is thought or self-consciousness itself, in its independence or absoluteness, or, in other words, in absolute thought or self-consciousness." Close quote. Here, you see, Principal Caird makes the transition which Kant did not make. He converts the omnipresence of consciousness in general as a condition of truth being anywhere possible, into an omnipresent universal consciousness, which he identifies with God in his concreteness. He next proceeds to use the principle that to acknowledge your limits is in essence to be beyond them, and makes the transition to the religious experience of individuals in the following words. Quote, "If man were only a creature of transient sensations and impulses, of an ever-coming or going succession of intuitions, fancies, feelings, then nothing could ever have for him the character of objective truth or reality. But it is the prerogative of man's spiritual nature that he can yield himself up to a thought and will that are infinitely larger than his own. As a thinking, self-conscious being, indeed, he may be said, by his very nature, to live in the atmosphere of the universal life. As a thinking being, it is possible for me to suppress and quell in my consciousness every movement of self-assertion, every notion and opinion that is merely mine, every desire that belongs to me as this particular self, and to become the pure medium of a thought that is universal, in one word, to live no more of my own life, but let my consciousness be possessed and suffused by the infinite and eternal life of spirit. And yet it is just in this renunciation of self that I truly gain myself, or realize the highest possibilities of my own nature. For whilst in one sense we give up self to live the universal and absolute life of reason, yet that to which we thus surrender ourselves is in reality our truer self. The life of absolute reason is not a life that is foreign to us." Close quote. Nevertheless, Principal Caird goes on to say, so far as we are able outwardly to realize this doctrine, the balm it offers remains incomplete. Whatever we may be in posse, the very best of us in actu falls very short of being absolutely divine. Social morality, love, and self-sacrifice even, merge our self only in some other finite self or selves. They do not quite identify it with the infinite. Man's ideal destiny, infinite in abstract logic, might thus seem in practice forever unrealizable. Our author continues, quote, "Is there then no solution of the contradiction between the ideal and the actual? We answer, there is such a solution, but in order to reach it, we are carried beyond the sphere of morality into that of religion. It may be said to be the essential characteristic of religion as contrasted with morality, that it changes aspiration into fruition, anticipation into realization, that instead of leaving man in the interminable pursuit of a vanishing ideal, it makes him the actual partaker of a divine or infinite life. Whether we view religion from the human side or the divine, as the surrender of the soul to God, or as the life of God in the soul, in either aspect it is of its very essence that the infinite has ceased to be a far-off vision, and has become a present reality. The very first pulsation of the spiritual life, when we rightly apprehend its significance, is the indication that the division between the spirit and its object has vanished, that the ideal has become real, that the finite has reached its goal and become suffused with the presence and life of the infinite. Oneness of mind and will with the divine mind and will is not the future hope and aim of religion, but its very beginning and birth in the soul. To enter on the religious life is to terminate the struggle. In that act which constitutes the beginning of the religious life, call it faith or trust or self-surrender, or by whatever name you will, there is involved the identification of the finite with a life which is eternally realized. It is true, indeed, that the religious life is progressive, but understood in the light of the foregoing idea, religious progress is not progress towards, but within the sphere of the infinite. It is not the vain attempt by endless finite additions or increments to become possessed of infinite wealth, but it is the endeavor by the constant exercise of spiritual activity to appropriate that infinite inheritance of which we are already in possession. The whole future of the religious life is given in its beginning, but it is given implicitly. The position of the man who has entered on the religious life is that evil, error, imperfection do not really belong to him. They are excrescences which have no organic relation to his true nature. They are already virtually, as they will be actually, suppressed and annulled, and in the very process of being annulled, they become the means of spiritual progress. Though he is not exempt from temptation and conflict, yet, in that inner sphere in which his true life lies, the struggle is over, the victory already achieved. It is not a finite, but an infinite life which the spirit lives. Every pulse beat of its existence is the expression and realization of the life of God." Close quote. You will readily admit that no description of the phenomena of the religious consciousness could be better than these words of your lamented preacher and philosopher. They reproduce the very rapture of those crises of conversion of which we have been hearing. They utter what the mystic felt but was unable to communicate. And the saint, in hearing them, recognizes his own experience. It is indeed gratifying to find the content of religion reported so unanimously. But when all is said and done, has Principal Card, and I only use him as an example of that whole mode of thinking, transcended the sphere of feeling and of the direct experience of the individual, and laid the foundations of religion in impartial reason? Has he made religion universal by coercive reasoning, transformed it from a private faith into a public certainty? Has he rescued its affirmations from obscurity and mystery? I believe that he has done nothing of the kind, but that he has simply reaffirmed the individual's experiences in a more generalized vocabulary. And again, I can be excused from proving technically that the transcendentalist reasonings fail to make religion universal, for I can point to the plain fact that a majority of scholars, even religiously disposed ones, stubbornly refuse to treat them as convincing. The whole of Germany, one may say, has positively rejected the Hegelian argumentation. As for Scotland, I need only mention Professor Fraser's and Professor Pringle-Pattison's memorable criticisms, with which so many of you are familiar. Footnote: the most persuasive arguments in favor of a concrete individual soul of the world, with which I am acquainted, are those of my colleague Josiah Royce in his Religious Aspect of Philosophy, in his Conception of God, and lately in his Aberdeen Gifford lectures, The World and the Individual. I doubtless seem to some of my readers to evade the philosophic duty which my thesis in this lecture imposes on me, by not even attempting to meet Professor Royce's arguments articulately. I admit the momentary evasion. In the present lectures, which are cast throughout in a popular mode, there seemed no room for subtle metaphysical discussion, and for tactical purposes it was sufficient, the contention of philosophy being what it is, namely, that religion can be transformed into a universally convincing science, to point to the fact that no religious philosophy has actually convinced the mass of thinkers. Meanwhile, let me say that I hope that the present volume may be followed by another, if I am spared to write it, in which not only Professor Royce's arguments, but others for monistic absolutism, shall